The desert night was silent until a single gunshot ripped across the canyon, echoing like thunder against the cliffs. Ethan Cole gripped his revolver, his breath shallow, eyes fixed on the shadows ahead. The dry wind tugged at his worn duster as sand whipped across his boots. He muttered, "No man fires in this desert without reason." The stars overhead shimmered cold and distant, their light a cruel contrast to the blood pounding in his ears. A horse neighed in panic, hooves striking hard rock as the echo of violence lingered. Ethan tightened his jaw, remembering every wrong that had led him back here. He thought of debts unpaid and graves unmarked, of betrayals carved deeper than scars. A scream rang out in the distance, sharp, desperate, pulling him forward like a ghostly hand. Ethan whispered, "The past never stays buried." He steadied himself, stepped into the darkness, and the desert seemed to hold its breath. Ethan Cole walked along the rocky ridge, the moonlight carving harsh lines across his face. He whispered, "This land remembers everything." His boots crunched against gravel, each step echoing in the silence. The desert smelled of dust and iron, a reminder of old wounds. A distant coyote howled, and Ethan muttered, "Even beasts mourn louder than men." He remembered how betrayal had driven him here. Every scar on his skin, a marker of choices that weighed heavier than chains. His revolver felt heavier than ever, as though it carried not bullets but ghosts. The wind carried fragments of voices, long gone, mocking him in whispers. He said through clenched teeth, "If I'm to bleed again, let it be for truth." The ridge ended in shadow, and he stood there, still, a man between memory and fate. Ethan Cole found a figure waiting at the base of the canyon. Young Jesse Turner leaned against a rock, rifle slung awkwardly across his shoulder. Jesse grinned nervously and said, "I knew you'd come this way." Ethan's jaw tightened, remembering the boy's eagerness that bordered on recklessness. He replied, "Hope doesn't keep you alive, Jesse." The younger man shifted, defiant yet uncertain. The night wind carried grit that stung their eyes, forcing both men to squint. Jesse whispered, "Someone has to believe in something." Ethan shook his head, muttering, "Belief gets men killed faster than bullets." Still, he saw the fire in Jesse's eyes, a fire he once carried but had long since buried. The silence stretched, broken only by the soft rattle of sand falling down the canyon walls. The two men made their way deeper into the canyon, the path narrowing as shadows swallowed the trail. An old voice emerged from the dark. Samuel Hayes stepped into the pale glow, his cane tapping against stone. Samuel said, "I thought I taught you to walk away from ghosts, Ethan." Ethan's lips curled bitterly, answering, "Ghosts don't walk away from me." Samuel's eyes, worn from decades of violence, softened with regret. He murmured, "You can't fight the desert, you can only survive it." Jesse shifted uncomfortably, caught between the weight of wisdom and Ethan's silent fury. Samuel sighed, his scarred hand resting on his cane, and said, "If you keep walking this path, you won't find peace, only graves." The canyon swallowed the silence, as if the desert itself waited for Ethan's choice. The canyon opened into a dusty town, its streets empty under the weight of silence. A lantern flickered weakly in the saloon window, and a sign creaked in the wind. Sheriff Granger stood in the center of the street, boots polished, badge gleaming cold in the moonlight. His voice carried across the empty street, "Ethan Cole, I was wondering when the desert would drag you back." Ethan froze, his hand brushing the revolver at his side. Jesse's breath caught, and Samuel muttered, "The past always wears a badge here." Granger's eyes narrowed, his stance casual yet dangerous. He added, "You left debts behind, and I collect what's owed." Ethan's chest rose, his silence louder than any reply. The town itself seemed to lean closer, waiting for the first spark. The dawn broke slow and heavy, painting the desert in bruised shades of red and gold. Ethan Cole sat alone by the fire's dying embers, his revolver laid across his lap like a sleeping serpent. His eyes burned with memories that clawed their way back each morning. He muttered, "Every sunrise feels like a debt unpaid." The wind carried the faint smell of smoke, and he thought of the cabin that burned years ago, taking everything he loved with it. His fists clenched as he whispered, "Justice is all I have left." Jesse Turner stirred nearby, glancing at him with unspoken questions, but Ethan remained silent, drowning in regret. Samuel Hayes leaned against a rock, his voice rough, saying, "The desert doesn't care for your ghosts, Ethan." The word struck deep, but Ethan refused to answer, staring instead into the rising sun, his scars glowing in its harsh light. The saloon smelled of whiskey and dust, its floor creaking beneath Ethan's boots as he stepped inside. Jesse followed, eager eyes darting around the dim room. The bartender gave a cautious nod, and a hush fell over the tables. Sheriff Granger leaned against the counter, a smirk curling across his face. "Ethan Cole," he said, voice sharp as broken glass, "thought you'd ride off into the dust for good." Ethan's hand hovered near his revolver, his silence cutting sharper than words. Jesse shifted nervously, gripping his rifle tighter. Samuel muttered, "This is a fool's ground." The sheriff's smile widened as he poured himself a drink, saying, "The desert may forgive, but I don't." The room's tension thickened, heavy as smoke, every man inside waiting for sparks to ignite. Ethan's stare never wavered, cold as steel, daring the lawman to strike first. At the far end of the saloon, a woman in a crimson dress rose slowly, her presence commanding silence. Isabella Kane's eyes, sharp and unreadable, locked on Ethan with unsettling familiarity. She said, "Not every ghost stays buried, Ethan." His chest tightened, memories of betrayal cutting sharper than a blade. Jesse whispered under his breath, "Who is she?" But Ethan ignored him, his jaw hardening. Isabella's smile carried secrets, as though she held the strings of the room itself. Sheriff Granger raised his glass toward her, his smirk deepening. Ethan muttered, "The desert may hold her, but it doesn't own her." Samuel Hayes shifted uneasily, his grip tightening on his cane, murmuring, "That woman's storm brings ruin." The silence stretched until Isabella's laughter filled the room, soft and dangerous, like silk hiding steel. Sheriff Granger stepped closer, his boots striking the wooden floor with steady rhythm. His badge gleamed like a warning under the lantern's glow. "Law doesn't bend for old ghosts," he said, eyes locked on Ethan. The saloon fell into silence, chairs scraping as men stepped aside. Ethan's hand brushed his revolver, a gesture more instinct than choice. Samuel Hayes muttered, "This law's rotten, Ethan." Jesse shifted, his voice cracking, "We don't have to fight here." Granger's smirk sharpened into a sneer as he added, "Fight or fold, Cole. The desert leaves no room for cowards." Ethan's stare held steady, cold fire burning behind his eyes. The moment stretched thin, a wire ready to snap. Every man in the room seemed to hold his breath, waiting for the first spark to ignite chaos. As Ethan turned to leave the saloon, a shadow brushed past him. A whisper carried with it. Isabella's voice, low and sharp, slipped into his ear. "Trust no one here, not even the ones you bleed with." He stiffened, his jaw locking, eyes narrowing as the warning cut deeper than a blade. Jesse called after him, "What did she say?" But Ethan walked on, silent, boots striking wood like thunder. Samuel Hayes frowned, muttering, "Her words are poison, Ethan." Sheriff Granger's laughter rang out behind them, a sound like rattlesnakes in tall grass. Ethan's silence grew heavier, and he whispered only to himself, "The desert doesn't whisper lies." Yet doubt carved into him like the scars already burned across his skin, and the night felt colder than before. The canyon echoed with gunfire as Ethan Cole crouched low, his revolver flashing against the stone. Jesse Turner fired clumsily beside him, the rifle kicking hard against his shoulder. Jesse shouted, "They're everywhere." Ethan growled, "Keep your head steady, boy, or you'll lose it." Bullets sparked off the rock, and dust rained down on their backs. Jesse's hands trembled, but his eyes burned with desperate courage. Ethan steadied his aim, his voice calm under fire. "Pick your shots, don't waste breath or bullets." The ambush closed in, shadows moving fast across the ridge. Jesse nodded, swallowing fear as he raised the rifle again. Ethan whispered, This desert only respects the brave. The boy pulled the trigger, and the echo thundered through the canyon, a bond forged in smoke and steel. The ambush ended, but silence was crueler than the gunfire. Ethan wiped sweat and dust from his brow, eyes scanning the horizon. Jesse leaned against a rock, chest heaving, his hands shaking. He muttered, "I didn't think it'd feel like this." Ethan replied, voice low, "Killing never feels right. That's the curse." Jesse's eyes met his, wide with realization, and he whispered, "But we lived." Ethan's face hardened, shadows deepening across his scarred features. "Living comes with a cost, Jesse," he said. "And it's always higher than you think." Samuel Hayes appeared on the ridge, leaning heavily on his cane, his voice gravelly. "This is just the start. Granger wants your blood, Ethan, and he won't stop till the desert drinks it." Ethan's jaw tightened and he whispered, "Then he'll have to bleed first." Inside a dim back room of the saloon, Isabella Kane sat across from Sheriff Granger, her crimson dress glowing against the lantern light. She whispered, "You think you hold this town, but Ethan won't break." Granger smirked, sipping whiskey slowly, his eyes sharp. "Everyone breaks, Isabella. Even him." She leaned closer, her voice laced with venom. "And if he doesn't?" Granger's hand rested on his holster, casual but deadly. "Then the boy dies first," he said coldly. Isabella's eyes flickered, torn between defiance and fear. She forced a smile, whispering, "You play a dangerous game, Sheriff." He leaned back, shadows cutting across his face. "Danger keeps the weak in line." Outside, laughter and piano music masked the poison being poured between them, a deal that would decide blood and loyalty. Beneath the pale desert moon, Samuel Hayes sat with Ethan, his cane resting across his knees. His voice was heavy with regret. "There's truth I kept from you, Ethan." Ethan's eyes narrowed, his tone sharp. "What truth?" Samuel sighed, shoulders sinking. "Granger was once my friend. I taught him the law, but he twisted it into power." Ethan's jaw clenched, his fists tightening on his knees. Samuel continued, "I should have stopped him before he became the man you face now." Ethan's voice was bitter. "Your silence cost lives." Samuel's eyes watered, old scars reopening in his soul. "I carry that weight every day," he whispered. Ethan turned his face away, the desert wind howling through the night. He muttered, "Then tonight, we put an end to it." The ambush came swift on the trail into town. Gunfire erupted from the rooftops, bullets sparking off wood and stone. Jesse Turner stumbled, falling hard into the dirt, his rifle skittering away. Ethan dove to cover, shouting, "Stay down." Samuel Hayes raised his revolver with surprising steadiness, firing into the shadows. His voice roared, "They won't take us easy." Dust and smoke filled the street as figures closed in, faces masked by darkness. Jesse cried out, scrambling for his weapon, his eyes wild with fear. Ethan sprinted, dragging him behind a trough, his own revolver blazing. He growled, "This is what they want, Jesse, chaos." Samuel's shots echoed, each one slower than the last, until silence bled through the smoke. The cost of survival pressed heavier with each breath. The night carried the sting of betrayal, as Ethan Cole discovered a torn letter hidden beneath his saddlebag. The words dripped poison, naming Jesse Turner as the one who had led Granger's men to them. Ethan's chest tightened, rage and sorrow colliding like storm and fire. He whispered, "Boy, what have you done?" Jesse stumbled into camp moments later, eyes wide, sweat dripping, trying to explain. "I never meant to," he stammered, voice cracking. Ethan's revolver hovered near his side, his finger twitching. Samuel Hayes stood between them, his voice heavy, anger blinds faster than bullets. Ethan's jaw locked, his voice trembling with restrained fury. "He was supposed to watch my back, not sell it." Jesse's tears shone in the firelight as silence cut deeper than steel. The desert seemed to lean in, hungry for blood. The town square burned with tension as Sheriff Granger strode through the crowd, his badge glinting like a curse. He shouted, "The law is mine and justice bends where I break it." The townsfolk muttered, their eyes downcast, unwilling to challenge his grip. Ethan watched from the shadows, fists clenched, anger simmering. Samuel whispered, "He's no sheriff, he's a tyrant." Ranger's men dragged a shopkeeper into the dirt, boots pressing against his ribs. The lawman's voice rang out cold. "This is what happens when debts go unpaid." Ethan's hand itched for his revolver, but he forced restraint, teeth grinding. Jesse whispered, "We can't let this stand." Ethan growled, "We moved too soon, we died too soon." The square crackled with fear as Granger's shadow stretched long under the lantern glow. The desert road stretched endless as Jesse Turner stumbled under the weight of failure. His rifle hung low, his spirit even lower. He muttered, "I wanted to prove myself." Ethan's voice was sharp, cutting. "You proved you're not ready." Jesse's shoulders slumped, guilt pressing heavy. He kicked at the dust, anger bubbling. "I can fight, Ethan. You don't see me for what I am." Ethan glared, eyes like fire. "I see you, Jesse. A boy chasing a man's shadow." Samuel Hayes shook his head, leaning heavily on his cane, voice weary. "Pride kills faster than bullets." Jesse turned away, fists clenched, tears burning his eyes though he refused to let them fall. The trail ahead shimmered with heat and silence. The boys mistake a weight, dragging all of them deeper into the desert's jaws. As the wind howled through the canyon, Samuel Hayes sat Ethan down, his eyes filled with storm and regret. "You walk the road I once did," he said, voice rough. Ethan's gaze burned with defiance. Samuel pressed on. "I thought vengeance would cleanse me, but it only hollowed me out." Ethan's jaw tightened, his silence a wall. Samuel's cane tapped the stone, his scars catching moonlight. "Granger was my failure. He became the monster I refused to stop." Ethan muttered bitterly, "And now he's mine to face." Samuel's hand trembled as he gripped Ethan's shoulder, his voice raw. "If you face him with rage, you'll fall the same way I did." Jesse lingered nearby, torn between fear and admiration, watching the torch of burden pass from old hands to new. Inside the saloon, Isabella Kane's mask began to slip. She paced slowly, her crimson dress trailing across the worn floorboards. Her voice trembled with hidden conflict. "I've played both sides too long." Ethan stepped into the doorway, his shadow stretching across the room. "You chose Granger," he said coldly. Isabella's eyes flashed, torn between defiance and pain. "I chose survival," she whispered, "but survival feels like death when every step is chained." Jesse's voice broke the silence. "Then help us." Her lips quivered, her stare locking on Ethan's hardened face. "You'll never trust me," she whispered. Ethan's reply was harsh. "Trust died in this desert long before you." Her hand brushed the pistol at her side, but she froze, her own war raging within. Ethan Cole pushed open the door of an abandoned office, dust swirling as sunlight slanted through cracked boards. A ledger lay open on the desk, its pages stained with ink and blood. His hands trembled as he read the names: families broken, debts stolen, all traced to Sheriff Granger. Ethan whispered, "He built his kingdom on corpses." Jesse Turner peered over his shoulder, eyes wide. "This is proof," he said, his voice filled with urgency. Ethan's jaw tightened, rage thickening in his chest. Samuel Hayes entered slowly, his voice weary. "I warned you he was rotten to the core." Ethan slammed the book shut, dust exploding upward. "Now the town will see him for what he is," he growled. The desert outside moaned with wind, as if echoing the truth uncovered. In the dim saloon corner, Isabella Kane sat with her head lowered, crimson dress shadowed in the lantern glow. Her voice shook as she confessed, "I thought I could play both sides, but Granger owns me." Ethan's stare pierced through her, cold and unyielding. She raised her eyes, filled with conflict, whispering, "I never wanted you dead, Ethan. I wanted out." Jesse clenched his fists, snarling, "You betrayed us." Isabella flinched, her gaze locking on Ethan, desperate. "I can still help," she pleaded, "if you let me." Samuel Hayes muttered bitterly, "The desert buries liars deep." Ethan's silence burned heavier than words. Finally, he said, "If you want redemption, it'll cost more than blood." Isabella's lips trembled, torn between fear and fragile hope. Sheriff Granger stood on the balcony of the courthouse. The town gathered below in uneasy silence. His voice boomed, "You think me corrupt? I keep order where none would exist." The townsfolk shifted, murmuring. Ethan stepped forward into the square, ledger in hand. "Order built on graves is tyranny," he shouted. Gasps spread through the crowd. Granger's eyes narrowed, hand twitching near his holster. "You think you're savior?" he sneered. Jesse shouted, "We have proof." Samuel Hayes added, his voice heavy with age, "I taught you law, Granger. You twisted it into chains." The sheriff's smirk faltered for a flicker before hardening again. "Proof dies with you," he growled, signaling his men. The square erupted with chaos. The desert's silence shattered by cries. The air cracked with tension as Ethan confronted Samuel Hayes under the starlit sky. Samuel's voice broke with guilt. "You think Granger's sins are his alone. I built the man he became." Ethan's face darkened, fists clenching. "You let him rot this town," he spat. Samuel's eyes filled with sorrow, his cane shaking as he leaned heavily. "I thought I was saving law," he whispered, "but I forged a tyrant." Jesse watched in stunned silence, the weight of history pressing against him. Ethan's voice dropped low, cold as the desert night. "Then his blood will wash your sins too." Samuel's hand trembled as he reached for his revolver, not in anger, but in grim acceptance. The silence between them was heavier than thunder. Gunfire tore through the alley as Granger's men attacked. Samuel Hayes shoved Ethan aside, his cane clattering to the ground. His revolver roared, striking down two shadows before a bullet ripped into his chest. Ethan cried out, rage mixing with grief. Jesse pulled him back, screaming, "We have to move." Samuel staggered, blood darkening his coat, his voice a broken whisper. "End it, Ethan." He collapsed into the dirt, the desert swallowing his last breath. Ethan's hands shook, his jaw set with fury. "He gave his life so we'd live," Jesse gasped. Ethan's voice was raw, each word torn from his soul. "Then we finish what he started." The night burned with violence, but Samuel's sacrifice lit the fire for the coming storm. The town braced itself under the blazing noon sun, shadows drawn thin as knives across the dirt street. Ethan Cole walked slow, each step heavy with resolve, his revolver hanging loose at his side. Jesse Turner followed a few paces behind, clutching his rifle with newfound steadiness, his face hard but pale. The townsfolk peeked from windows, silence gripping them like chains. Sheriff Granger stood tall in the center, badge glinting like a brand of power. "You came back to die, Ethan," he called, voice loud enough to rattle every window. Ethan's jaw tightened as he answered, "No, I came to bury you." The air thickened, the heat pressing down, every sound muffled beneath the desert's cruel stillness. The ground itself seemed to wait for blood. Jesse Turner's breath came fast, his rifle heavy in his arms. He whispered, "I won't run this time." Ethan glanced back, his eyes cold but softened by a trace of pride. "Then stand tall, Jesse, and let the desert see you." The young man swallowed his fear, squaring his shoulders as Granger's deputies lined the rooftops. One raised his rifle, but Jesse lifted his own, firing with a steadiness that surprised even him. The shot rang true, sending the deputy sprawling. The townsfolk gasped, whispers rippling like fire. Ethan muttered, "The boy's not a shadow anymore." Granger snarled, rage cracking his calm, "You'll die for that, boy." Jesse's voice was steady now, steel forged in fire. "You'll have to kill me first." The square erupted in chaos as Ethan Cole and Sheriff Granger faced each other, guns drawn. Dust swirled in the air, the heat shimmering around them. Granger sneered, "You were always a coward hiding behind ghosts." Ethan's voice cut like steel, "And you were always a tyrant hiding behind a badge." Their eyes locked, neither blinking, the weight of every betrayal hanging between them. The crowd hushed, every soul holding its breath. Ethan's fingers twitched, the world narrowing to the man before him. Granger smirked, Let's end this, outlaw. The silence stretched, and then both men fired. The thunder of their revolvers tore through the desert, smoke curling into the sky as time itself seemed to shatter in the blast. As the gunfire cleared, Isabella Kane stepped into the street, her crimson dress blazing under the sun. Her pistol gleamed in her hand, her eyes torn between loyalty and betrayal. She shouted, "Stop this madness!" Ethan's revolver still smoked, his chest heaving with rage. Granger staggered, wounded but standing, his glare burning into her. "You chose him," he spat. Isabella's voice trembled. "I choose freedom, not chains." She aimed her pistol at Granger, but her hand shook violently. Ethan barked, "Decide, Isabella." The desert seemed to press down on her shoulders, every eye in town piercing her soul. With a cry torn from her heart, she steadied her grip, the choice cutting deeper than steel. The final shot cracked like thunder, echoing through the empty town. Sheriff Granger fell to his knees, blood staining his uniform, the badge glinting one last time before sinking into the dirt. Ethan Cole stood over him, revolver steady, eyes hollow with the weight of justice. Granger gasped, "You think this makes you free?" His voice rasped as life slipped away. Ethan muttered, "No, but it ends you." The lawman's body collapsed, dust rising to claim him. Jesse Turner stepped forward, chest heaving, eyes wide with the reality of victory. Isabella Kane lowered her pistol, tears streaking her face. The townsfolk emerged slowly, silence heavy with awe and fear. Ethan holstered his revolver, his shoulders heavy, the desert now echoing with the price of survival. The town lay hushed beneath the weight of death, the dust still hanging where Sheriff Granger had fallen. Ethan Cole stood in the square, shoulders heavy, eyes distant. Jesse Turner dropped to his knees, staring at the dirt stained with blood. "It's over," he whispered, voice trembling. Ethan shook his head slowly, murmuring, "Nothing's ever over in the desert." Isabella Kane watched from the edge of the street, her crimson dress torn, her face pale, tears leaving faint tracks down her cheeks. Townsfolk stepped out carefully, their voices hushed, their gazes heavy with both gratitude and fear. Samuel Hayes' absence pressed like a wound, his sacrifice echoing through the silence. The desert wind stirred, carrying ash, whispers, and the cost of every bullet. Inside the courthouse, the badge that once gleamed with authority now lay abandoned on the judge's bench. Ethan Cole stared at it, his jaw tightening. "Law without honor is nothing but iron on leather," he muttered. Jesse Turner stepped forward, eyes wide, voice cracking. "Then what do we do now?" Ethan's gaze hardened as he replied, "The town decides, not one man." Isabella Kane leaned against the wall, arms crossed, voice soft but sharp. "And who will lead them?" Ethan turned away, the weight of leadership pressing like chains. He whispered, "Not me. I've carried too many ghosts already." The badge glinted one last time under the sunlight, streaming through the cracked window, before silence claimed the room. The boy who had once been unsure now stood tall in the town square. Jesse Turner faced the townsfolk, voice shaking but growing stronger with each word. "We've lived under fear long enough. This place belongs to us, not to tyrants." Murmurs turned into nods, faces lit with cautious hope. Ethan Cole stood nearby, his arms folded, watching silently, his eyes filled with something between pride and sorrow. Isabella Kane lowered her gaze, the weight of choices heavy on her shoulders. Jesse raised his rifle, not in threat, but as a vow. "I'll stand for this town if no one else will." The desert wind stirred, carrying dust that swirled like a crown around the young man's head. Ethan Cole stood at the edge of town as night fell, the horizon burning with fading light. Isabella Kane approached, her voice soft. "You could stay. They'd follow you." Ethan shook his head, his eyes fixed on the desert stretching endless before him. "I'm not made to lead," he said, voice raw. "My place is out there, where the past can't follow." Isabella's eyes glistened, torn between pulling him close and letting him go. Jesse Turner stood a few paces away, silent, his face set with respect. Samuel Hayes' cane leaned against the wall nearby, a reminder of sacrifice. Ethan whispered, "The desert always calls us back." He stepped forward, the sound of boots heavy against the dust. The desert swallowed the final light, as Ethan Cole walked alone down the trail, his silhouette shrinking against the endless horizon. Jesse Turner's voice carried faintly behind him, "You'll always have a place here." Ethan did not look back. Isabella Kane whispered into the wind, "He belongs to the desert." The stars flickered alive above, cold and eternal, watching his figure fade. Each step was heavy, not with defeat but with acceptance. He muttered softly, words carried by the wind, "Some men aren't meant for peace." The town behind him breathed new life, but his path stretched on, lonely and uncertain. The desert called, and Ethan answered, leaving only dust and echoes in his wake.